How good is the Rangers bullpen actually, and how much help do they need? On this episode, I'm ranking the top 5 free agent bullpen arms and top 5 Rangers prospect arms that could help this Rangers bullpen be better in 2023. All that and more on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on the Texas Rangers. I'm Bryce Patrick, a cripplingly addicted Texas Rangers fan since 2010, the founder and host for all 4 seasons of this Locked On Rangers podcast. Thank y'all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. If you're not already, you can follow me on Twitter at Bryce Patrick. You can follow the show at Locked On Rangers and subscribe on YouTube, where the best way you can help grow the show is to comment any single thing below. We are gearing up. I was hoping to hit 1,500 subscribers by Christmas. I think we're about 20, 30 away. So if y'all could go hit that subscribe button, that would be a fantastic Christmas present to me. You don't have to get me anything else. Just click one little button. If you already did, you've already got me a fantastic Christmas present. But the Rangers still have some gifts to unwrap in free agency. Chris Young has said they are not done. They would like to add 1 or 2 bullpen arms, an outfield bat. We'll talk about the outfield bat at some other time. But I want to look at this bullpen and where it is, because I think it got a lot of undeserved flack last year. There are still some pieces to be added. It is not perfect, but I do think it is still a pretty good bullpen. Last year, the bullpen got overworked by a really not good starting rotation. There was a lot more asked of this bullpen, and I think the guys who blew up towards the end of the season, I think the reason for that, especially Dennis Santana and Brett Martin, I think the two biggest factors in this is that these guys were worked really hard, really often early on in the season, and kind of wore them down towards the end of the year. Dennis Santana never really quite got back to his old self, and that's why the Rangers basically just dumped him to the Braves to save money. I think all they got was cash considerations in return. Brett Martin is still here. He still has some options. He still has some wiggle room, and he's also a lefty, so that makes him a little bit more valuable. But I think that the reputation of this bullpen is a little bit unwarrantedly bad, because once they got their two best relievers in the entire organization, they've been out for a significant amount of time. They came back around the middle of the year. It was a little longer than I thought it would take for them to get back. But once they were back, and Jonathan Hernandez and, of course, Jose Leclerc, those guys were straight up excellent. I mean, last year, Hernandez at age 25 had a sub-3 ERA in 30 innings, a little under a strikeout per inning. The walks were a little bit worrisome, but he didn't allow basically any home runs until I think the final series of the year was when he allowed his first home run of the season. It wasn't to Aaron Judge. He did allow a pair of those home runs, but did not allow the Judge historic 60-second home run. But Jose Leclerc was also fantastic. Kind of took over that closer's role, a sub-3 ERA from him as well, in 47 and 2/3 innings, more than a strikeout per inning, about his standard 4 walks per 9 innings. That's kind of what he was. But the Rangers also had some other really, really great bullpen pieces. Brock Burke was fantastic last year, as was Matt Moore. Both those guys, lefty, multi-inning relievers. Taylor Hearn didn't work out in the starting rotation, but once he moved into that bullpen, he was significantly better. As a reliever last year, he had a 3.5 ERA in 18 games, 41 innings, so very much a multi-inning reliever, more than a strikeout per inning, and about around 3 walks per 9 innings, and only 2 home runs in those 41 innings as a reliever. Granted, as a starter, not the same case. 9 home runs in 13 starts, which was 59 innings and a 6.5 ERA. Just significantly better on the strikeouts, the walks, the whip. Everything was just better with him as a multi-inning reliever. I think he could end up being a kind of nasty 1-inning reliever, but him as a multi-inning guy, I mean, if you have that tandem, you don't really need another guy like Matt Moore. I mean, granted, you could always use him, but I do think that the Rangers are pretty well set in that category in terms of here's what they have. They got 2 back-end guys, inning number 8 and inning number 9 guys, I think Hernandez is going to be the setup guy. Leclerc is going to be the closer. Brock Burke and Hearn are your multi-inning, high-leverage lefty guys. Your seventh inning right now, I think, goes to Joe Barlow, who had a fine year as a closer for too long because the Rangers didn't have really any better options. Brett Martin and John King are the kind of lefties you throw in there randomly, and Josh Spores is kind of the last guy there that is also participating. This is assuming an 8-man bullpen, which I think 7-8 is about where the Rangers are going to sit in terms of how many relievers they're going to carry this year. So in terms of what you're looking to upgrade, I think unless John King, I don't know what to make of John King. I don't know that the Rangers do too. He had a significantly long stretch where he was absolutely dominant, and then a lot longer where he got absolutely blown up. Maybe it was because he was being overused. I'm not entirely sure. I'm more leaning towards that was the case with Brett Martin. Not as sure with John King. And Josh Spores, it's been like 3 years, and I still don't know what to make of Josh Spores. Sometimes I'm like, wow, that guy's really, really nasty. And other times I'm like, this guy should not be in a major league pen. So I think those two guys, I think are my main priority of like, all right, if someone's got to go, I think John King and Josh Spores are kind of the first guys on the chopping block. Maybe Barlow, I don't think so, because Barlow showed a little bit more and more consistency in his flashes of brilliance than the other guys did, but I think that's kind of where the Rangers are. They're going to need to add some relievers, and there are quite a few on the market, even if you knock off the guys who have already been signed. Kenley Jansen signed a 2-year, $32 million deal with the Boston Red Sox, which is kind of a forecast of them losing Xander Bogaerts. I guess it makes sense. Go sign a closer. Don't sign your homegrown, everybody loves shortstop. It doesn't make sense to me. And I think the Rangers are in kind of a similar position of where I don't think really anybody should be spending big on, or a whole lot of people should be spending big on big money closers, these old guys with, proven track records, because relievers in general are just so finicky. Giving anyone a long-term deal gives me the heebie-jeebies, especially guys who are on the wrong side of 30 or the wrong side of 34 in the case of Craig Kimbrell and Aroldis Chapman, who are options here. Coming up, we're going to look at my top 5 most wanted bullpen free agents and 5 guys on the farm who I think could be huge factors in the Rangers bullpen this year. But first, this episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From pro football to college bowl season to basketball and the World Cup, we have got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can even find those at BetOnline as well. We are always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. If you're wanting to place some bets on, I'm sure there'll be some futures out pretty soon. The Giants made a pretty darn big splash in getting Carlos Correa. They signed a couple other guys. They missed out on Judge, but it seems like they've got their pieces for the future. Maybe they'll be contending for that NL West. Maybe it'll be the Padres who signed the aforementioned Xander Bogaerts and have, 3 really good shortstops, actually probably 4 really good shortstops on their roster if you're picking them to win. The Dodgers, it feels like they're not doing a whole lot this winter, which is very confusing. Maybe they're saving up for the Shohei Ohtani Derby for free agency next year. But anyway, you are wanting to place your bets, whether it's baseball or any other sport, head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more, because BetOnline, it's where the game starts. So the Rangers have quite a few options in free agency if they want to go that route to get their reliever. I don't think they'll go the trade route. I feel like it's borrowing trouble, because giving up prospects for relievers is just something that really, really gives me the heebie-jeebies, because again, even the most consistent guys, there's not that many that every single year you know exactly what you're going to get out of them. And those guys are really, really rare, and they usually don't get away. Mariano Rivera's don't grow on trees. They really don't. But there are a few guys who have been pretty consistent, and I think the Rangers can count on. That is my number one option, is a guy like that. It is Adam Ottavino, who was with the Mets last year, was not their closer, but was very, very effective when he was pitching for the Mets last year. He is a 37-year-old, 6'5", 245-pound righty. He was just lights out last year with the Mets. 66 games, 65 and 2/3 innings, 79 strikeouts, under a base runner per inning, and a 2.06 ERA. You look at some of his advanced stats, and they are real pretty. I tell you what, his average exit velocity is in the 99th percentile of baseball. You look at some of the other indicators like that: expected slugging, barrel percentage, expected ERA/WOBA, hard hit percentage. All of those in the top 4 or top 3% of baseball. Really, really great at not allowing very much hard contact, not allowing a lot of base runners. Doesn't walk a whole lot of hitters in the top quarter of baseball in that. Same with whiff rate. Strikeout rate is in the top 11% of baseball. So he is really, really darn good at that. And also his extension, which is how far he gets off the mound, where he is releasing the baseball. A guy at 6'5" is probably going to get some good extension, but he's in the top 10% of baseball, which means that fastball is right. All of those pitches are right on you, just out of his hand and into the plate. You have no time to react. His fastball isn't that high in terms of velocity. It's averaging 94 miles an hour, but when you are 6'5" and you have that kind of extension, it makes it play way, way up. The spin rate is in the top third of baseball. The velocity is right around middle of the plate. Doesn't get a whole lot of chases out of the zone, but he gets strikeouts while staying in the zone. That is really, really impressive, and something that I think is an indicator of the best pitchers and the best stuff. If you can get swings and misses at stuff in the zone, which is what Jacob deGrom does really, really well, then that is a sign of being a very, very good pitcher. So I think somewhere in the 2 years, $9.8 million range total, not per year, is about what it would be to go get him according to Spot Track. I would absolutely love that. I think he'd slot in as the Rangers' 7th inning guy, maybe an 8th inning guy. He's not a multi-inning guy, but he is another high leverage, consistent righty. I don't think he'd take over the closer spot either, but he is another guy. So if you have pitched, Leclerc and Hernandez in back-to-back days, and you're in another high-leverage game, and you need somebody, Adam Ottavino is a guy that you can count on in that situation. So I think he is my number 1 free agent choice. Number 2 on this list is a reunion. Matt Moore. 2 years, $6.6 million, I think would be enough to get it done. Last year with the Rangers, he had a breakout year, had a new curveball that everyone was raving about. Oh my gosh, this new curveball is so totally different. It makes everything else he does so much better. And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. And turns out it was fantastic. It played really, really well, made the fastball look even better. Had a sub-2 ERA, was a very, very effective multi-inning guy, 1.95 ERA, 74 innings, 83 strikeouts. Not quite the same strikeout rate as Brock Burke, and a little bit higher of a walk rate, 4.6 walks per 9, but only 0.4 home runs per 9. I don't know if that's going to carry over next year, because he had been a guy who had given up a whole lot of home runs, but I do still think that he is a different kind of pitcher than he was before. This is an effective guy. He's going to be 34 next year. And honestly, if he signs somewhere else, part of this is just because if he signs somewhere else, it's going to piss me off even more than they didn't trade him at the deadline when he had all this value. They just wanted to re-sign him, just whatever. I liked him. The Rangers liked him. More importantly, he was very effective, and he wouldn't be all that expensive. I think this would be a great guy to have in the Rangers bullpen. If you have 3 multi-inning lefty high leverage arms, that is a rarity. That is a real rarity. And all of those 3 guys are pretty good against righties and lefties. They're not just exclusively, I can only get lefties out, and sometimes I'll get the righties. They're all really, really good, and I think he would be a very, very good complement to this pen. And also just that added little factor of it would annoy me if he went somewhere else and the Rangers didn't trade him and lost him for nothing. Another lefty on this list, a guy who I think is more of a 1-inning guy, Andrew Chafin. 2 years, $5 million should be enough to get the job done. He pitched with Detroit last year. He is a 32-year-old, listed at 6'2", 235 pounds, just throws a fastball and a slider, and really, that's about all he needs. Last year with Detroit, had 64 games where he pitched, 3 saves, 57 and a third innings, and 67 strikeouts, a 1.17 whip, and a sub-3 ERA at 2.83. His career in 9 seasons, a 3.23 ERA, 400 innings, 422 strikeouts. The whip was about where it was this year, for his career, and he was fairly effective. Gets a lot of swings and misses, about middle of the plate when it comes to walks, really effective on strikeouts, expected slugging, batting average, hard hit, WOA, all of those good things, and the whiff rate is in the top 13% of baseball. So the fastball is not spinning a whole lot because it is more of a sinker. I think he is very, very effective against lefties, and should be a fine guy if you're wanting one of your high leverage one inning guys to be left-handed. This would be a really, really good option. He is a little bit on the older-ish side in 32, but he's been effective. He's got a track record of being successful and has been pretty effective, honestly, the last 3 years, not just last year and in general for his career. So I think that would be a pretty good pickup. Number 4 on my list, it's not as much about how good I think this guy is relative to the others. I just think in terms of fit and in terms of what it might cost, I am less enthused, but still fairly enthused to put him in the top 5. Number 4, I have Corey Knebel, a reunion with former Ranger great Corey Knebel. Never pitched for the Rangers in the major leagues, but did pitch for the Rangers for a smidge in the minors. A former University of Texas guy, was traded with Detroit, I believe, to Texas with Jake Thompson, and then was traded to Milwaukee, I believe, which is where he made his major league debut. He is 31, coming off a pretty solid season with the Phillies last year. Fastball velocity is in the top half or top 20% of baseball. Same with fastball spin rate. And his curveball spin rate is in the top 11% of baseball. Gets some pretty decent extension there. Had a 3.43 ERA last year with the Phillies in 46 games. 44 and 2/3 innings, and 41 strikeouts. Had an all-star season mixed in there a few years ago with, I believe, Milwaukee, which is where he had his all-star season. Pitched for the Dodgers for a little bit. Fine option. A little bit on the, middle-aged for baseball players. Hate saying 31 years old is middle-aged, but that's where he is. But the contract expectation, according to SpotTrack, is what kind of turns me off of this deal. They have him averaging $5.1 million annual value. They have the deal at 4 years, $20.696 million. That feels like a lot for a guy who's been pretty consistent, would be pretty good, but not closer money. I think $5 million for a 7th inning guy feels like a lot. It could be a good fit, but 4 years also is where I have a little bit of concern going that route. So if you're wanting to go for the cheaper route, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to look at that last cheaper route and some prospects who could play a big role in the Rangers bullpen next year. But first, let's word from our sponsors. Now, number 5, finishing out my free agent list, is a reunion with another former Ranger great. That's Tommy Hunter. Yes, you heard me. Tommy freaking Hunter pitched for the Rangers from 2008 to 2011, was traded in the Kohei Uehara trade to Baltimore. He was still a starter back then. Actually, 2011 was when he switched to the bullpen. He is going to be 36 years old, pitched the last 2 seasons, 2.5 seasons with the Mets, pitched with Tampa Bay for a little bit, but last year he was pretty effective with the Mets. Hasn't pitched a whole lot in the last few years. This is why it is a very much a buy low deal. Hasn't pitched 50+ innings since 2018 with the Phillies. That year he threw 64 innings, had a 3.8 ERA. Last year, in a small sample size at age 35 with the Mets, had a 2.42 ERA in 22 1/3 innings. Had a couple of outings where he threw multiple innings, only had 18 outings and 22 innings, so you can do the math there. Has kind of changed his approach, his repertoire quite a bit. Become a cutter first guy when he used to be a primarily four-seam fastball. Now he's cutter, fastball, curveball, and pretty effective with that spin rate of his fastball. Not super high in the velocity range, but if you're wanting another guy who is solid and consistent, and you're knowing what you're getting from him a little bit more than some of those bottom tier last options in King and Sports, then I think this would be a pretty good deal. 1 year, $1 million. I'm really just throwing that out there. I have no idea what the value on this guy would be. Maybe it would just take a minor league deal and see what he's got at camp, see how healthy he is. But I like this option. I think it would be a pretty good deal for the Rangers. But if you're going with anyone outside of those top three, I'm less enthused about. I think there could be some value in Knebel and Hunter, but I'm really, really excited about these prospects. Here are 5 guys I think are the most likely to play a big role in the Rangers pen and that I'd be most excited about. Number 1 is my boy Zak Kent, the first and so far only guest on the pod who is in the Texas Rangers organization. He is 24 years old, had an up and down season last year. It was a really, really rough start for him. He is still a starting pitcher. I do think he could be a starting back into the rotation guy, but him in the bullpen as a multi-inning one time through the order, kind of 2-3 innings guy, I think could be very, very effective. He is a slider first guy, has a 4-seamer and a 2-seamer. The 4-seamer kind of cuts. He's got a curveball and a changeup. So really a 5-pitch pitcher, which is why I think he could get through so many guys, go through the lineup at least once out of the bullpen. The beginning of the season was really horrendous for him. 8.1 ERA in April, ERA over 6 in May, over 5 in June, and in July he just everything clicked. Had a 1.13 ERA in 5 starts for Frisco in 16 innings in July, had 18 strikeouts, cut down on the walks, cut down on the home runs and hits and everything. Only 2 runs in that entire month. Then he got called up to AAA to end the year. 5 starts in September with Round Rock, in 27 innings, a 1.67 ERA in that time, had 23 strikeouts and 13 walks. Did allow a pair of home runs, but I think was really, really effective, and the Rangers protected him by putting him on the 40-man, and I don't think that would have happened if that Rule 5 draft happened in the middle of the season, but he kind of turned some heads with how he did towards the back end of the season. I think he is just about ready for the major leagues. Probably would come up sometime around midseason, depending on how good he looked in camp and if the Rangers were committed to having him as a multi-inning relief guy. He did pitch in relief as a member of the VMI team, also pitched as a reliever to start the 2021 season where he broke out. Didn't have a good enough spring training to make the rotation and really kind of found himself in the bullpen. I really, really like his stuff. I do still think that he could be a starter, but I think the Rangers could use him the most as a multi-inning right-handed option, get through the lineup one time, or maybe even a high leverage guy, because that slider is straight up nasty. The fastball, both those they look very, very similar, but they move in opposite directions. So I think he could be a really, really effective reliever for the Rangers. Number 2 is a guy who also started last year, but started in the major leagues and did a really, really decent job for what he was asked to do, which I think was a bit too much. That's Glenn Otto, who's going to be 27 next year. The slider is absolutely nasty. The fastball it's fine. The curveball's okay, but I think that slider would really, really play up and be absolutely disgusting in kind of a multi-inning relief role. I think that is ideally where he sits, the fastball taking up into the mid-90s or the high upper 90s as opposed to the low to mid-90s where it is right now. I think that is the ideal situation for Glenn Otto and could be really, really effective there. Maybe he could be an average back into the rotation pitcher. That'd be fine. The Rangers have a lot of depth options there. They have quite a few guys who are like, all right, if the Rangers do get hurt, I don't think they're going to start him as a multi-inning relief guy. I just think that eventually this could be the route that he goes and where he could be the most effective for the Rangers. Obviously, the starting rotation is filled with guys who have some injury concerns at the top end, at the middle end in Gray and Andrew Heaney, and maybe keeping him as a starter, keeping that workload built up. So if you need him, if Dane Dunning isn't quite ready to step in that rotation, he is kind of your 7th starter at this point heading into camp, what I'm assuming, unless he has some breakout camp and is absolutely fantastic and blows the doors away and beats Jake Odorizzi out of a rotation spot. I don't really see that happening. He had some nice moments, but I don't think that he's going to be a guy who can go through the order 3 times. I don't think his stuff is like that as a starter, but I do think he could get through the order very effectively one time as a reliever or get through three guys. I think that would be a great role for him. Another guy, a lefty, Lucas Jacobson, a guy who you probably haven't heard a whole bunch about. He is a 27-year-old, started the season with, I believe, Frisco, and then ended the season in AAA, was very effective, a big, tall lefty listed at 6'5", 190 pounds. On the older side as a prospect, 27 years old. I think he's just about ready for the majors this year. He pitched in 19 2/3 innings, 30 strikeouts, 3 saves, 2.29 ERA this year. He was just very effective. He's got a splitter, I believe, that is very effective as well. Not a whole lot of gas in the tank in terms of velocity, but very effective. And because he is 6'5", he gets downhill very quickly, so he doesn't have to throw as hard for it to be as effective and look like it's coming at you very hard. Really interested to see what he does this year and if the Rangers want to push him into that major league pen or just give him a few more innings in AAA to kind of see, all right, are you really ready for the big leagues? Number 4 is another guy who was a starting pitcher, and I think it's time. I think you all know who I'm talking about. It is Spencer Howard. The time has come. The time has come. It is time for Spencer Howard to be a reliever. You have lost the trade. You have lost the Kyle Gibson trade. Hans Kraus is already a major leaguer, and you also gave up Ian Kennedy, who was pretty effective, and Kyle Gibson, who was having an all-star season, and had another year on a contract, very favorable contract. Didn't end up pitching phenomenally for the Phillies, but was still a capable starting pitcher on a major league roster. And the Rangers got a guy who was a bit of damaged goods. Feels insensitive to say, but he was a project guy who was a former top 100 prospect in baseball. The Rangers thought, all right, maybe we can fix this guy. Maybe we can, figure out if he's a starter or a reliever and make him effective as one. They tried him as a starter. It did not work. We had some moments where it was like, okay, wow, it's kind of looking like that, but he's looking like he might be a starter, had really high end potential, but he just got so focused on throwing 2 pitches and not using all 5 of the pitches that he had, and the cutter that he seemed intent on using all the time was just getting absolutely blasted by major league hitters. And so I think time to throw him in that bullpen, let that velo tick back up into the upper 90s. The raw stuff is really nice, really electric, and if he's just going for an inning and just letting it ride for 3 batters, 4 batters, 5 batters, then that is a lot more effective version than we have seen at the major league level, or really even in AAA. I mean, he had his moments in AAA, but just for the most part, I just think it's time to throw him in that bullpen. Make him, if you want him to be a multi-inning guy, great. I think he can do that, but stretching him out as a starter, unless you're really intent on it, you want to start him in AAA, and he absolutely blows the frickin' doors off. He looked fantastic in spring training last year. I thought he was going to make the Rangers rotation. I thought this was the guy, and then everything just regressed so quickly. Like once the season started, it's just nope. I'm not going to look anything like I looked in spring training. The stuff was nasty, and it went from nasty to nasty in a bad way really quickly. And I think that Spencer Howard could be one of those guys who benefits very greatly from turning into a reliever. Last one, number 5, is Yerry Rodriguez, who did make his major league debut. If you blinked, you might have missed it, or if you were too busy focused on Tom Greaves' last game in the Rangers booth, you might have missed it. But he made his major league debut. The final day of the season, had 1 inning of work, allowed 1 hit, no walks, and a strikeout, and no runs. He had a 0 ERA, one of 2 Rangers pitchers to have a 0 ERA. Can you think of who the other one was? I'll give you just a second. Give up? It's Charlie Culberson, the only other Rangers pitcher to have a 0 ERA. But Charlie did it in 2 innings, so I don't know. Maybe Culberson is a little bit higher prospect. No, he's not. He's not. Yerry Rodriguez is the definition of up and down, just really kind of crazy swings for him. He is 25 years old, born in the Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. Has had a lot of really great moments for his MILB career. Has a 3.29 ERA, 119 games. Started as a starter for quite a while, well over a strikeout per inning in his minor league career. This year was just highs and lows, ups and downs. I mean, one month he'd be absolutely electric, untouchable. The next he would be very, very touchable. Had a ERA over 7 in April and a sub 2 ERA in June, 154 in 11 and 2/3 innings with 20 strikeouts that month. He was fantastic. Next month, ERA just a little bit below 4. Then in the month of August, an ERA of 6.75. Then in September, you had an ERA of 2.31. And it's just like, I don't know what Yuri Rodriguez I'm getting. I really, really like the raw stuff. It is absolute gas in the, I believe, upper 90s is about where he was averaging with his fastball. Could be a real factor for the Rangers. Texas needs to figure out if he is a Jekyll and Hyde guy or if he can be consistent. If he is more Jekyll and Hyde, then you're basically just getting another Josh Sborz. And while those guys have value, I think the Rangers need to have a lot of sure options in their pen. I do want to give a few honorable mentions to some prospects who I think might end up making their major league debuts this year. One of them is right-handed pitcher Chase Lee, the Viper out of Alabama. A guy who could pitch multiple innings, a right-handed sinker baller, kind of the sidearm, sidewinder, sinker slider kind of guy. Was again a guy who had kind of a Jekyll and Hyde, except a little more dramatic. Had a 0 ERA for his first month in Double-A, then it jumped up to over 4, then jumped back down to 2. Had some moments where he got really, really touched up in Round Rock, but showed he could be an effective multi-inning reliever. Did not end the season very well. 9 1/3 innings with a 4.82 ERA. Did have 11 strikeouts, but also 4 walks. Not exactly sure what the Rangers are getting in this guy. Probably will see a lot more time in Round Rock this year. Maybe it's more towards the end of the year that this guy gets called up. Another guy is Antoine Kelly, who was traded to the Rangers for Matt Bush, along with Mark Mathias. Kelly had a pretty decent season before he got traded. Nothing crazy, but I feel like the Brewers were a little bit reckless because he was coming off thoracic outlet syndrome. He is a left-handed pitcher with really, really nasty raw stuff. Just turned 23 years old in December. Former second-round pick out of Wabash Valley College in Mount Carmel, Illinois, and had an unreal strikeout rate. 91 innings before he got traded to Texas, and 119 strikeouts. But a guy who really had a really, really bad walk problem for his minor league career. Has 5.5 walks per 9 and 12 strikeouts per 9. Not a whole lot of home runs, though, so maybe you can live with that. Maybe it's kind of the Matt Moore element. I think it won't be long before the Rangers put him in the bullpen. Really, really nasty raw stuff that I think could play into the upper 90s, maybe even touch 100 if he is in a one-inning relief role. Not sure what the Rangers are getting out of him. I think he was unprotected in the Rule 5 draft, did go unpicked. Really, really glad about that. But I think if the Rangers can hold him in, if he's just a little bit healthier, not coming off of the year after thoracic outlet syndrome or thoracic outlet surgery, then I think he could be really, really effective. Will be in Double-A next year. Will probably start as a starting pitcher, and who knows what the Rangers are getting out of him, but I know the raw stuff is really, really tantalizing and could end up making his Major League debut as a really nasty lefty out of that bullpen. But that's going to do it for today's show. I'm trying to plan a crossover with Locked On Rockies to talk a little about John Gray and some other goings-on and some remaining free agents. Then probably later on in the week, on Friday, I will look at a show about the outfielders and what the Rangers should do there, because these are pretty much the two options that the Rangers have left to fix on this roster. But thank y'all so much for listening, and until next time, don't forget to enjoy baseball.